She is. Thank you, madam. Great. I hope you've all had a really good afternoon, a bit of chill out time, a bit of a walk, a bit of fresh air maybe, or maybe you're just asleep, whatever you needed. The next hour really is just a conversation, which you're invited to take part in as well. But we've got a panel of people. We've got Tracy, we've got Anne, and we've got Rob. And Rob and Ruth have come together. So they're going to talk about their experiences from a variety of places. But the best way for us to get started really is for them to introduce themselves. So Anne, I'd like to invite you first of all, just to tell us the context that you're working in and a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. It's really good to be with you all this afternoon. I'm a bit out of practice of doing Zoom, but I'm looking forward to having this conversation. So I'm a school chaplain, and most days I do wear a collar, highly visible and available in my ministry to 1,500 teenagers aged 11 to 18 in a pretty disadvantaged area of Hull. In East Hull. I'm at Archbishop's Centremoor Academy, so Church of England secondary school, and I've been there for 8 years. Is that, how much do you want me to say?
That's okay. That's
enough?
That's fine.
Okay.
I'll leave Tracy next. Thank you, Anne.
Yeah, hi, I'm Tracy. I'm married to Andy, and it works most of the time. I was waiting for the laughter in the room, and yeah, sorry I can't be with you in person today. I've been doing other stuff, but it's very great. It's great to be with you all. I'm in North Bradford. We cover 6 parishes. Well, we cover 6 parishes now. When we first started, we covered 3 parishes. I work at our 2 main upper schools, and we cover 3 quite difficult estates, really. So that's us, and that's where we work with yeah, our teenagers in this area.
Okay, that's great, Tracy. Thank you. And Rob and Ruth.
I am Rob Sutherland. I'm the vicar of Mixenden and Illingworth, which is in North Halifax. It's really strange to describe what Mixenden and Illingworth is like. It's 2 parishes that were put together about a week before I became the vicar there, which is nearly 10 years to the day. On November the 15th, I'll have been the vicar there for 10 years. It is an estate parish. It's in the bottom 5% deprivation in the country. I think we're about 350 from the bottom of the list. There's 12,000 parishes if you go to the, I think we're about 350 from the bottom of it. But if you look out of my office window, it looks very similar to the views out of these windows because of the geography of Halifax. So I have a river that runs along the bottom of my garden, deer that bounce by, and a woodpecker that likes to sit and perch on the bird feeder. But we have 12,000 people who range from some of the most deprived in the country to not much above that. When we talk about deprivation, we talk about how even the people who aren't on the free schools meals register are only just out of the free school meals register. So that's where I am.
Great.
And this is my wife, Ruth.
Nice to meet you, Ruth. So really, this afternoon's conversation is about worship that we've tried. Maybe it's not worked, and for what reasons? What have we learned from that? Different approaches, but worship that we've worked with unchurched young people, and how you've gone about it, and that kind of thing, and just what you've learned from it, really. So I'll come back to Anne. Do you want to tell us about 1 or maybe 2 things that you've kind of worked on? And I'm appreciating that you're going to reach right back into a whole depth of experience and different things that you've tried in different times. And there may be some more recent things as well, but anything is of use to the people in the room, I think.
Okay, well, so just to give you a little bit more of my context, because I think it's kind of hard to explain it without. So in our school, we have this amazing chapel. It's on the 5th floor. It's kind of like in the point of the building, so it's like the highest place that you can get to, and that's kind of where a lot of the chaplaincy work is based, although I'm out and about a lot of the time. And so students can come there for all sorts of things, and I've over the years really sort of turned it much more into their space than it was when I first got there. And so the majority of the work I've done has been using prayer spaces kind of ideas, and it's happened in all sorts of different ways, really. Often sort of through RE, where they've come up in classes to do prayer spaces, and it's been really surprising that how engaged they are with all the different activities that we offer for them to do. They're always creative, they're always reflective, they're always sort of starting with life and the experiences that our young people are dealing with. I noticed very early on that there was a massive amount of loss amongst our kids, not just through bereavement, but all sorts of reasons. And that was kind of showing in all kinds of ways. So I really felt that whatever the chapel space was, it needed to be a place where that loss could be named and brought to God in prayer. And so actually, I suppose when I think of worship with our young people, my starting point is about giving a space for prayer. So it doesn't really look like church very much as we know it. And it probably doesn't feel very much like church as we know it. And it feels quite free form and chaotic at times, but it's always creative and got that space really for the young people to make their own responses. So yeah, that's sort of the main gist of what we do. And
I think that's really helpful, Anne, that you've just mentioned that the young people would come for RE lessons, which is a formal education time, and yet you talked about something that really sounds like an informal kind of space. So I guess, can they come to chapel at break time and lunchtime as well, did you say? Yeah, so we run drop-ins, and before COVID I used to do lunchtime service. I did a lunchtime service of Holy Communion actually, which was quite creative. I used to get about 20 kids come into it for a while, and then obviously COVID hit and I couldn't do anything because we weren't at school. I couldn't do anything with that kind of thing. And I'm just now in the process of thinking through, well, so what do we do now? Now we're back. Do we just go back to what we were doing, or do we do something different? Or so I'm just kind of like working that one through really. But yeah, students can access it in their social times. They can access it, and they do. And what's been quite interesting actually as well is I look after the wellbeing team. So we've got 2 full-time wellbeing staff who are not particular. Well, one of them is a Christian actually, but the other definitely isn't. But they come up and bring students up to the chapel. So like if someone's had a bereavement, they'll come and they can light a candle or do a heart and hang it on the tree, or make a memorial flower out of tissue paper, or and they actually feel really comfortable enabling those students to do something that is deeply prayerful and deeply therapeutic, even if they're not calling it prayer. That's how I see it. They're choosing to come into that God space that, it's the chapel. They all know it's the chapel. It's not something else. It's not disguised. It's clearly that's what that space is for. So yeah, it's it's been quite an experience of experiment and trying things that you think, well, I don't know if this is going to work, or I don't know if this is right, but I don't know. Creativity is key, I think. That's really helpful, Anne. We might come back to the things that didn't work in a moment, but I'm going to hand over to Tracy now. Have you got some examples of where you've tried worship with young people, or your first forays into worship with young people? Oh, you're muted. Are you muted?
I am now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. So our first priority really was not to start a worshiping community. So really it was all about relationship building for us, which took the time, to be honest with you. We always knew that young people would want to gather and gather in spaces. And we had to build a team of volunteers to make sure we could enable that to happen, but not too many. And because obviously we didn't want it to be a teacher pupil environment, but we wanted to create a space where young people the whole thing was run by young people for young people. And so one of the questions that we asked them was, if you could have a space to worship God, what would you do with that space? And they came up with 5 W's, and the 5 W's are thus. The first one was welcome. They wanted people to welcome them. They wanted to worship. That is, we sung 2 or 3 worship songs together. They then wanted to have because they wanted a wee break, because by that time they needed a fag. Our young people don't survive without smoking after, half an hour. And then they wanted word. So we gave them an interactive Bible study and word, and they told the story as much as we did. And then we had wait wait was prayer, which is, we called it sacred prayer in the end. And we would do all sorts of different stuff that they could do. So that was the 5 things that they put together, and then we facilitated it. And we said, that's fine. We just need to be able to tell you, we need this slot, we need to pray, and we need to read the Bible. Where can we put that? And then they came up with with the 5 W's. So I thought that were pretty cool. So I share that with you. That's how we developed, that's the stepping stone of developing a worshipping church, and that run for many years, doing it in that form.
That's really interesting, Tracy, that you talk about creating the space. Was there anything else that you did physically in the space that you were in?
No, so you wanted to talk us about challenges, which I guess is the next bit. And our biggest challenge was the use of buildings.
Oh, okay.
So I'll come on to that later, if that's okay.
We'll hold that then. That's great. Thank you, Tracy.
Yeah.
Rob, handing over to you.
I'm going to talk about principles rather than about specifics. There's no formula for doing this stuff, but I'll take you through the beginning of my journey as the Vicar of Mixenden, which is that if you've ever been to a licensing service, you know that you get lots and lots of Christians along into a building that they never go to. There's a bishop there, all your friends and family are there. The people who don't normally go to church come with you as well to celebrate the fact that you're going to be the vicar of this place. And then the next Sunday is the first time you find out what it's actually like. And I went from having 150 people crammed into a building that's not much bigger than the room that we're in now to having 24 people in their late 60s and over, and Amy, who was 14 years old and a foster kid, and she used to sit next to me in an alb, and she would basically hand me the stuff that I'd forgotten, and that's what I discovered was my church on a Sunday morning. And the first principle I sat there going to Ruth, I don't know what the heck I'm doing here. We went to Greece and ended up in the Greek Orthodox Church it's a different time for Easter in the Greek Orthodox Church. So we went through the whole of Easter, and it was the dawning realization that actually I was the vicar of the marketplace, that people wander in and wander out. We don't have the kissing of an icon and the lighting of a candle and all of that sort of thing while the priest's off in the corner going, Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison, Kyrie eleison. But we have this marketplace where people walk through the doors, they find what they find, and then they wander out again, often for a fag out there. This will be a recurring theme if you work in a place like ours, The point at the peace during a baptism service, I discovered that half of the congregation disappeared and were off for a cigarette. And it was the realization that it's the marketplace that is the important thing, and that when people walk into the marketplace, they need to find what is there is for them. So with our young people, it's no use saying, oh, come back next week, we'll have an activity for you. You have to fake it till you make it. If you do not have something on a regular basis for people, they won't stick around long enough to find out what's there next week. So that is a key principle. Fake it till you make it. And look at the gifts of the people around you is the second thing I would say. We have a church warden whose husband is a pigeon fancier. He races pigeons. I now know so much about racing pigeons. And I also know that most dove releases aren't doves. They're white pigeons. Doves are stupid and can't find their way home. So if you release a dove, you have to release a pigeon over there, which guides the dove home. But if you release a white pigeon knows where it's going. Pentecost, we had a white pigeon that was released at our parade service by Logan, who is one of the scouts, and he now must be an adult. I bump into him occasionally, but marketplace, people come and people go. So Logan released this white dove on the day of Pentecost out in the garden, whilst I was dressed like a vicar, wearing full-on chasuble, the full shebang, with the scouts who were all holding out the flamed flags that we'd been doing with them, and the things that they'd done with a salad spinner with paint everywhere, and we had this dove release. And then I would normally put it up on the screen, but I haven't brought anything like that for you. But you use what gifts you have. You can't look at what other people have and say, I wish I was them. You've got to look at what you've got in your own congregation and what you've got in your own store cupboard and what you've got in your own mind, and use that. People aren't interested in you being fake. They're interested in you being authentic and using whatever it is that you do. If you're a heavy metal kid like me, that will involve being a heavy metal kid who goes onto an estate and goes, none of you like heavy metal. I don't really like Britney Spears, but please tell me why Britney Spears is. I'm so out of date. Wow. I need to go home and rethink my life. Why you like what you like? Tell me about it. Convince me that I genuine interaction, genuine authenticity is what people are craving. They're not craving you pretending that you're someone that you're not. I hope that we're all right.
That's great. Because that really feeds on what Tracy was saying about the building the relationship. Yeah.
I should have mentioned one of the first things I did was I went to the Scouts and talked to them about what a communion service was and how, if you wanted to be, I prepared the entire Scout troop for communion would be the technical way of putting it. Even though, and I said, and if you think you would like to take communion, then you will have to go and ask your parents. But if you do, then that's fine. So yeah, I did communion preparation with an entire Scout troop because I took it at face value. It's a parade service, so it should be for the Scouts to be there at a parade service.
Inclusive.
It needs to be their church.
They can't just turn up and watch it like... No. It's not an entertainment, is it?
Depends on who the vicar is. No, it's not. We form community with whoever comes in through the door, and we do that regardless of whether we're thinking about it consciously. We do that week in, week out, and we include who we want to include, and we exclude who we want to exclude. And if you're being genuinely inclusive, that means that you came in through the door, like when Elliot came in through the door with his grandma because his dad had recently died, and she was grieving, he was grieving, and she brought the great grandkids, and he went home going, I like church, they have jobs for you to do. I'd given him a box of rocks when he walked in through the door, and I said, everyone in the congregation needs one of these. Could you make sure that everyone gets one? That was the job I gave him. It was literally something. I used to be an RA teacher. It was the kid who came in through the door first, and you say, could you hand them out for me?
Help me. I need somebody.
It's that thing. Can you hand these out for me?
Yeah.
And it's you are part of it, and you've only walked in through the door for the first time. In 5 minutes, you're in. That's it. Come, be part of this.
So this is this marketplace, finding a way for people to belong and go, oh, I can do something here. I am somebody. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Value.
Yes.
Valuing everybody who comes in through the door.
And I've got worth and value here. I don't need to wait until I've become over 18 to be of worth and value.
No, exactly. It's working out ways of saying things without getting yourself in trouble if the wrong people hear you say it. When you start talking about communion preparation and things like that, they talk about, well, what if they don't understand the Eucharist? And I say, I'm a priest and I'm standing behind the altar. What if I don't understand the Eucharist? I've done many, many, many years of theological education, but what if I'm not 100% certain exactly what it is that Jesus told us to do? But I know that Jesus told us to do it. So I do.
That's really helpful. Is there anything else that you want to come back in and add to, Tracy or Anne, about this belonging and finding participation? Yeah, Anne.
I suppose one of the things I didn't say at the beginning, because I kind of thought, well, it's a bit obvious, but maybe it isn't entirely obvious. I think one of the gifts of being a school chaplain actually is just the fact that being present with these, they're a captive audience in a sense. So it's different from kind of the world of being in a parish or a community, because I have this privilege really of being amongst these kids for potentially 7 years, which is extraordinary. And actually, I think about other forms of chaplaincy, it's probably quite a unique window of time that there's a possibility to have influence. But also, I think at the heart of all that I do in chaplaincy, it is the relational stuff. It starts with that actually most of what I do is pastoral care with some of the most vulnerable kids, but and out of that flows those other opportunities and possibilities of worship and prayer. But yeah, it comes out of those relationships, just the same as both Tracy and Rob have spoken about, I think. yeah, I just wanted to add that really.
I'm just wondering, in a school environment, how did they know that? Do you think there are students who never come into the chapel ever in those 5 or 7 years? Or how did they, is there like a tour at the beginning and they all walk through it at least once in their lifetime, as it were? How will they know that they are welcome in that chapel space?
Yeah, they all get a tour when they first come, but also throughout their years, at some point in the year during RE, most year groups will have come up to the chapel for something. But also the other thing, it's sort of parallel, if you like, is I oversee and lead a lot of the collective worship, and that's for the whole school. So, you know, like this week, I'll speak to all of them in a gathered invitational act of collective worship. So like I'm part of the furniture really. So they know that, you know, they know I'm the God woman, I suppose. So it's been about trying to be normal and natural and like just not too weird. And so yeah, I mean I work with some really vulnerable kids who would never go in a church, I don't think, but they find the chapel a really safe space to be in.
That's really helpful, thank you. Tracy, is there something you want to add to any of this participation talk and welcoming?
Just the young people that we work with, we fall between those two stools really. We don't have a church building, so we don't have a marketplace for people to wander in and out of. And we are in the school, but we're not there 24/7, 5 days a week. Sorry. So we have to find a way of being in the school that built relationship, but then moving them on a stepping stone. What next for, if we want these kids to worship Jesus, how are we going to enable that and facilitate that to happen? So that was our thinking. So of course, Sorted's well known now, but in the early days, of course, it wasn't, and it was quite a struggle really. And some of the challenges was the attitude of the school, really. Some of them really, really difficult relationships that we had to build, as well as with the kids, in order for it to happen, really. And it did, so that was great. But it was about empowering young people and having them been, you know, involving them in participation, which I think is absolutely key. I mean, I'm with Rob with that. But you know, we can talk about that later.
Okay, I'm just going to open up the questions to the floor a minute while we're on this theme of participation and welcoming the young people in. Has anybody got any questions at this point before we might move on? I just want to kind of move us along and not take you with us. Anything anybody wants to ask or comment on or probe a bit further? Okay, I'll move on. Okay, so what have been some of the challenges that you've faced? I'm going to come to you first, Rob.
Challenges tend to start with credibility. And whether people are prepared to talk to you. And that is all about what Tracy was saying about relationship. I've got a girl in our youth group now who's 13, who I've known since, she was 3. But when we went camping over the summer with our youth group, you're there at the point where after 8 years, she's got the question, why do you believe in God then? You're the vicar. What is it that made you want to be the vicar? What is it, you know? And that is a very different experience than someone turning up, no matter how long you've known them, and saying, I want to tell you about Jesus. When someone is asking you, because they have a relationship with you, what it is about you that gives you faith in something. And that takes so much time to build up. The work we've done with the Scout troop, for example, it started off with the conversations about my predecessor's predecessor when they first started out as the Scout troop, and all of the barriers that were put in the way and all of the arguments that have gone on. You've ever had anything to do with a uniform organisation, you will know that there are people who say, and the Scouts have done this. And you're like, okay, have you had a reasonable conversation about it, or is it just a battlefield? And it's that those barriers and credibility to be able to have a real deep and meaningful conversation with somebody about why your faith is important, why our faith is important, and changes things and changes the world in which we live in. And that credibility has often been the stumbling block at the start, whether you are going to a school for the first time and they just assume you're a God botherer who's going to be forcing the Bible down their throats, to the uniformed organizations where it's kind of, they've got our arm around our back that we've got to go to church at least 4 times a year, otherwise we're not allowed to use the hall. And it's all those things where historically we've got such an issue with credibility, that building those relationships, like Tracy was talking about, is the most important thing, and it's the starting point of it all.
Have you spent time in enabling the rest of the congregation to build a relationship, or would you say a lot of it centers around you? No,
it's all about, I had a really interesting conversation. I can't remember who it was who said it. It was in my ministerial development review. Someone said, the perceived wisdom of working on an estate is that Father knows best is the only way it works. And for some reason, you managed to give away all of the power and it somehow works. And I was like, I haven't even thought about it. Having the book stops here is only fun when you let somebody else have the book stop with them, setting up a toddler group with someone new at the helm of it. And she's been saying to me this last week, well, they should have got in touch with you from Show Start to talk about whether, and I went, it's okay. You can make those decisions and you can tell me what you have decided. And power dynamics are only fun if you give away all the power and let people play with it.
Interesting.
Oversight is what you need to have in those circumstances, but there's plenty of capable people in our congregation. I'm building those relationships between people, and sometimes they fall apart and sometimes they fight, but enabling them to happen. The I don't believe in God scout leader is now my church warden. Which, is there a story to share there? Is there more to Rock Mass is a thing. We do this Eucharist once a month, or we did before the pandemic, which is all heavy metal. And when you do something like that, there's a lot of lifting and carrying needs to be done. And so we'll come and support you. And so David and Diane and Joe and Tegan, they were all the leadership of the Scouts. I said leadership. Tegan was 13 at the time, I think she was. And they'll come and lift and carry and put up a PA system and all this sort of thing. And I don't believe, but it's an important part of scouting. And Tegan's always too cool for school. She's 22 now. She's about to get married. But she's always too cool for school. It's like, oh, I can't believe I'm here in church. And by the time we'd spent 5 hours sorting out, putting up a PA system and all of that thing, and eating lunch together and stuff like that, there's this little voice went, is there a job for me to do in the service? Yeah. If there isn't, I'll make one up. Wow. And it's that sort of thing where this is your space now. You have some, even though David was always saying, I don't really believe in this and that. It's like, well, actually, you can have some of this power. It's creating those opportunities, but you don't always have to be intentional. It might just fall on you and you might go, okay, I'll find you something to do. Yeah, a friend of mine uses a surfing metaphor, which is that you can spend your time on a surfboard paddling like mad, or you can wait till there's a wave and ride it. Yeah. And that's much easier in my experience than paddling like crazy. Yeah. That is really helpful, because that makes me think of the learning journey that we've look at in pioneering. So that listening and then loving and serving. And we've been talking about how the fact that listening goes through all of those parts. It's never just listening. We've done that, move on. Listening happens all the time. And that's that watching for the wave, isn't it? Yeah. I knew nothing about pigeons. I now could tell you all sorts of stuff about pigeons and how to use them in worship. But that's part of the listening. That's great. Yeah. Excellent. Okay. What might be some of the challenges that you faced, Anne?
I thought this was a great question. I had to really think about this, because there have been quite a few in different ways over the years. But I think the biggest challenge I felt I faced when I first started in this role was it seemed like everybody I ever met to begin with said, I'm not religious, but, and I think I learned quite quickly that actually to kind of quote that back in public to people and say, I know you think you're not religious, but you always say but. And so what's the but? You know, what's the question? What are we saying? You know, because they weren't saying I'm not. I used to hear it as I'm not religious and therefore I'm not interested. But actually, what I found is it's I'm not religious, but I think there might be something. I'm not quite sure what it is, but you know. So it's kind of like that, getting my head around how to respond to that and to kind of expect that the whole kind of spirituality of especially around the sort of prayer space stuff that we do, that I kind of, you know, very much sort of a mustard seed faith, you know, if one person's engaging with God in some way that we hadn't imagined, then well, that's good enough, that's more than good enough, isn't it? But and kind of like trying to see it in a much bigger frame of reference, I suppose. Right. so that was one thing. I think the other thing for me personally has been about sort of unlearning my own narrow definitions of what worship is. Having grown up in the Methodist Church and then being ordained in the Church of England and kind of largely sort of evangelical charismatic background, really having to kind of like go, actually, worship's much more than what I already knew. And for me, music's always been such an important part of worship and singing, but actually we hardly ever do any of that at the moment because it's just not where we are, and it doesn't seem to really quite work. So kind of going, actually, this is good. Creativity is key, and it's okay. Someone once gave me a word quite early on that they felt they'd had from God for me, which was like never before. And that was a really freeing word, because I'd have these sort of creative ideas and thoughts of things to do, and then I'd be thinking, oh, I don't know if I can do that, because I've not really seen anyone do that before. But now I kind of think, oh, it's okay, you know. that's God's creativity through the Holy Spirit at work. And actually it's a bit like what Rob was saying about giving power to other people and leadership and responsibility. Actually, it's about it is that making space and letting go, and you know, leaving people to be able to respond for themselves. So yeah, a lot of unlearning, I think.
That's really interesting. I was reminded of a book recently by Reverend Bob Mayo, Gospel Exploded, and he's got a whole chapter on unchurching the churched. So that's quite an interesting thing, isn't it, to kind of peel back, or the other phrase that we've used is to take off our church goggles, our experience of what we think church is, or the congregations that we're serving where we're trying to do youth work. They're expecting people and young people to come in and do church like we do it, but we need to unlearn that churchiness in order to discover this spirituality and how we might meet with God in new ways, or that young people might show us new ways of meeting with God.
Sorry, I was just going to do some joined up thinking and have a conversation with Anne, if that's all right. In school, you talk about people who are not religious, but do you find, and you mentioned right at the beginning about having an area where people do things about bereavement and things like that. Do you find that is an area where people suddenly start the conversation with you through grief?
Very much so, and I think, you know, I mean, we've seen that particularly, haven't we, through the last couple of weeks, that there's this kind of longing, I think, and you know, much more open place that we're in. And yeah, definitely. And actually, I mean, when I first started working there, I was trying to work out how to pray with people if they came for kind of support around bereavement, and whether I should or I shouldn't. And it sounds a bit ridiculous, but it felt like a real dilemma to begin with. But actually, what I have found is that that's what they want me to do. You know, so it's a real. It's in those moments of real vulnerability and despair and grief that God comes close. One of the prayer space activities that I created was based on the verse from Psalm 56, verse 8. He keeps all my tears and puts all my tears in a bottle. And so I've got this huge, I don't know if you've seen those Coke money boxes. They're about, like, I don't know, a couple of feet tall, and they're transparent. And I just created these purple paper tears, and people come in and write on them and put them in there and leave them. And I don't read them as they put them in there. I have emptied it on occasions and looked at some of the things that people have written, but they're just extraordinary. And it's definitely like real depth of offering this stuff to God. Yeah, extraordinary.
It's really, I'd never intended to come and talk about death and grief, and I've never talked about it particularly in a context like this before. But you got me thinking about how it's actually a time when people, particularly young people, turn to you and are expecting you to provide a space where they can do some of the most intimate things that any human being can do, to grieve for the loss of someone who was close to them. There was a girl in year 3 who had a degenerative disease who died, and I did the funeral, and it was a purple horse-drawn carriage with 2 white horses and little girls in princess dresses all around the crematorium, and working out how to grieve and say goodbye to someone at that age who was in your class is such an amazing, privileged moment in the midst of something that is such grief and despair, but enabling people to express that in a way that is authentic to them, with little princess dresses and cupcakes at the Working Men's Club down the road, and then planting the apple tree in the grounds of the school and having a couple of words to say, because it isn't really about you and what you're doing, but you're enabling, in a strange way, that marketplace of faith, which is that you are put in a position of trust where I'm going to bring my little seed of faith to you and the grief I have for my classmate, and trust you. That's the relationship bit that Tracy was talking about. Trust you that you are going to hold this well for us.
But it's that coming alongside. And I think you started talking, Anne, about that, enabling them, coming alongside somebody and enabling them to discover that they are a spiritual being.
Yeah, definitely. So it comes back to, and I can't remember whether it was Tracy or Rob said this, but it was about, sometimes it's about creating that space, and then really getting out of the way as well. I think that's what I've discovered anyway. But yeah, definitely.
What do you mean by getting out of the way? Because as you were saying about creating that space, it's that listening, recognizing that the wave is coming. Do you let them, are you saying you let them ride the wave and you just see what they do with the ride? Is that what we're talking about?
I think so, to some degree. You know, when I think about some of the kids that come up to the chapel and they want to, I don't know, like they might be creating a flower to remember somebody out of tissue paper, and we might sit with them and we might talk together as they're doing that, but I won't sit with them the whole time. I might leave them to have their own sort of silence in that. Or if we light a candle, I might offer to pray in words with them, or we might have a moment of silence, or they might even say a prayer. And it's that kind of like, well, I suppose that's what I mean about getting out of the way, is about giving space that, like, just because we're the ordained minister that's there, for example, or whoever we are, you know, as the adult, that we don't actually have all the words and the answers. So I suppose that's what I mean about getting out of the way.
Fill the gaps.
So they can encounter God. So that, you know, I can get, you know, I remember hearing, I think it was, I can't remember who it was, but somebody said, you know, we need to lead people to Jesus, but let him do the rest. So that's what I suppose I mean about getting out of the way.
Cool. Rob.
That's kind of what I was just about to say, was that we live in an increasingly spiritual country, but it is totally decentralized and unregulated. So we've just been in Skipton, where we've been in about 5 different shops that will sell you various different potions and spells and stuff like that, because apparently that's what Skipton's got, lots of shops, hippie shops. Much to the disgust of Dawkins, there's lots of spirituality about, but so asking the question, what are we doing? Are we actually going to be guides or police when it comes to the journey that a young person is on? Are we going to guide them in the direction to Jesus, to find where the spiritual ground, where the soil is good? Or are we going to be the police who are saying, you're doing it wrong? You know, you're doing it wrong. Can you make sure you go away and come back and do it right? You know, and it is about the invitation and the offer and the welcome to come and find the. I was at the Northumbria community about 10 years ago, and he said, where are your wells? Where is it you're going to draw your water from when you're in a dry place? And pointing people towards the deep spiritual wells, rather than trying to make them stand behind the railings and make sure that they're on the correct path, because if you climb over the railings, then you might find, you know, we're not the police, we're the spiritual guides, all of us really as a community.
Yeah. Tracy, I'd like to draw you in at this point. Have you got something from your experience that adds to this?
I think my observation would be that different contexts, it's different in different contexts. I think, I mean, it's great that we're all from different backgrounds, and we're all ministering in different ways. I can imagine there'll be some people sat thinking, well, that's not my context, and I can't relate to that, or I'm finding it difficult to relate to that, or thinking, well, that's just exactly what it's like for us, and yes, I can run with that. So I think we just have to be mindful that what works in one place and one church, even if it's neighbouring on, it doesn't necessarily work for others. I think that's one observation. The second thing is you talked about, you want to talk about the biggest challenges. I think is how we started this conversation, and I think I can only speak from Sorted's context. So Sorted is a fresh expression of church that doesn't have a church building and relies on nice vicars to be nice and lend us their buildings, which is great when they are, and it's not so great when they change and then you have to move your church. That is a real challenge, and we have to be realistic about that. I think the other thing is we didn't decide the young people were simply not available on a Sunday. So we talk about worship on a Sunday, but actually for Sorted, we worshipped on a Monday night, because most of our kids were at the other parents on a weekend. They weren't back on a Sunday night, or they just got back and the mothers wanted to see them, or they were getting ready for school and, you know, year 7. Of course, we predominantly work with year 7, so that's age 11 upwards. So so that you know, in our context, that's what it is. I suppose the other thing is that we have had a handful of volunteers, and I think I would say don't be afraid of saying no to people. Yes, we look at the gifting in people, and yes, we look at the gems, but you know, I just think sometimes we're so pressured to get on and get our group going and get a worshipping community going, or whatever you're going to call it, that sometimes the people that we ask to help actually are not conducive to that. They don't see the vision, they don't get what you're about, and you find it really difficult. So there's been a handful of volunteers that we've had to try and say, but it's absolutely fantastic that you want to volunteer and do God's work, and we really think that you'd be really good at doing blah blah blah, but we're not sure that you're going to be okay continuing to do Sorted, because when you've got kids spitting and swearing and telling you that Jesus is an effing this, that and t'other, you know, if you don't have volunteers that can see beyond that and see the vision, which is actually these are really antisocial kids because of the environment that they're living in, and one of our areas is in the 1% of the deprivation of the whole of the UK. So I'm with you, Rob. You know, we are dealing with, you know, very vulnerable people that have often been abused in unimaginable ways, and sometimes you just don't want the person coming in and being a school teacher or shouting at kids and there's a level expectation of what to behave. So we often do our volunteers, we train, so we untrain the volunteer and retrain them the sorted way, if that makes sense. And I think that's really useful as well. I was going to say, so volunteers, not on a Sunday, use of buildings. I think the other thing really is in the early days and even, in the early days and even now, we're always looking at what others do so we can nick their gems, but we don't do it per se. So we've had a tent in our, we've had a prayer tent, and then we discovered that girls and boys were really rather liking a prayer tent. So we stopped that pretty soon. But we experimented with it. And I like this. I mean, one of the things that I do really, it's just in my nature, is that I delegate all the time. So I lead, but I delegate all the time. And I think that's really key. I think, I think if we get insecure leaders that find it difficult to let people just get on and do. In fact, I have staff now that are with me, and they ring up and say, is it okay if I do this? And it's okay if I do that. And I'll say, well, you're leading it. So, and they can't get their head around that, we're getting there slowly, but, but it is, and James will tell you the story. James is there, I think. And James will tell you the story when we interviewed James to come and work at Sorted all them years ago. And something that I still say now when I'm interviewing people, I've got an advert out for a pioneer evangelist at the moment, and this is exactly the line of questioning I will take. What do you think to a cup of tea?
There we go.
And you ask James what a cup of tea is, and he'll tell you exactly what I mean. And basically, I don't want a cup of coffee, and I don't want a cup of hot chocolate, but we just want a cup of tea. And the cup of tea is a worshiping community where kids can come and they're worshiping Jesus, and they have to own their own faith. It's not ours. You can't give them your faith. Yeah. They've got to be selfish and have Jesus for themselves. So, and how you get there, because we're all different, but if we work together as a team and we're steering people in the right direction, and it's quite intentional. I mean, we do use the word intentional quite a bit, because I said to James, I don't bother if you sit in a coffee shop and drink coffee all day, as long as the intention is you're going to bring that person to worshiping Jesus. And that's just it, isn't it? You empower people, and now James is doing amazing work down in Ipswich, which I'm sure he'll share with you all in due course.
Brilliant. Okay, I'm going to open the questions back up to the floor, because I'm really grateful to Anne, Tracy and Rob for sharing so much, but I'm guessing that you're thinking, oh, but I just need to ask you this, or I just wondered what you meant by that, or whatever. So we're going to pass the microphone around. Does anybody want to kind of pick up on anything, the cup of tea or the pigeons or whatever it is? Has anybody got a particular question, or where you're struggling to apply it to your context, as Tracy was saying, yeah, but my context is not quite the same. Can you just help me stretch that to my situation? So, come on.
Tracy, just a bit about the cup of tea, which which was the thing that I'm not sure you missed this bit out, but it's like the thing of, well, it doesn't matter. You always say it doesn't matter whether the milk goes in first. Yeah. Sugar, the tea bag. It doesn't matter what order anything goes in, because everybody does a cup of tea different. I mean,
that's the point.
But we want a worshipping community, which is the cup of tea, which is, in other words, there's a million ways to do it, and your ways is as good as anyone, which is kind of what Rob said as well. Anyway.
Yeah. Thank you.
Principles, not formulas.
Yeah.
Is anybody thinking, oh, there's a principle there that I'd like to try, but I just need to tell you about my context and get some wisdom from these people while they're with us? Yeah.
Hi, Anne. Where do I look? Right. Just a question. I'm just about to start working in the school with the chaplain that has to work with multi-faith. What does that look like in your context, working with other faiths?
Well, we don't really have any other faiths.
Well done.
Well, actually, that isn't entirely true. but we are predominantly a white working class community, and there are 2 Muslim students and 1 Muslim teacher, and so so predominantly it's not a huge thing that we've had to really think about. So that's not a very helpful answer to you for your context, is it?
I think it's probably more for us really. In Bradford we have Hanson, which is the 3rd largest secondary school in the UK, and it's completely diverse. I mean, Christianity is underrepresented in Hanson, and I would say that we go in there under the well-being hat, so that we're still building the trust and the relationship, and then creating something outside of school, either after school or small group, where you can bring people into and then have the life discussions, and well, what's it mean, and then you've started the ball rolling.
All right, thank you. I'll tell you how I do it next year.
Brilliant.
I won't wait till next year. See you at Christmas, mate.
Yes, absolutely.
And just to add to what's been said really about formula and principles, and that there are no quick fixes for any of this kind of stuff. And I think some church groups or people will say, oh no, well, if you just do this or if you just do that. I often talk about alpha, not because there's anything wrong with alpha, but it works in certain contexts. It's not a quick fix. And I think we want a quick fix, don't we? Because we're passionate about bringing people to Jesus, but there aren't quick fixes. It has to be about relationships. It's always about building relationships, and that will look different in all of your different contexts. So I just wanted to, I suppose, encourage you that if you've started something and it's not working yet, or if you've tried certain things and they're not working, it's because there's no formula or quick fix that or group or program that will work everywhere, but that's okay.
I look at Alpha every year, every single year, and every single year I look at Alpha and go, there is no way it would work in our community. But every year, faithfully, I look at it thinking that it might be the answer, and it never is, which is a shame. I really wish it was. I really wish I could just open the box and pull out the videos and put them on and have a discussion over a meal. But people in our community don't go to each other's houses. People in our community would rather come. The first year I invited my PCC to come and have a drink on Christmas Eve, just a little. It's the dumb thing. So I did. And they all sat in my house waiting to be able to go home again. And I realized they would much rather be in church. If I'd brought a bottle of wine to the church, they would have sat there and happily chatted with me for an hour and a half. And it's a totally different context where people are saying they won't come to church and cross the threshold. Actually, they won't go to each other's houses and cross the threshold. They will go to the church because it's a community space and it's owned by the whole of the estate as a community space.
So it's about understanding the culture of your community and the practices that they already have and how you fit in with those practices. Yeah. The listening. We're going back to the listening again, aren't we? Absolutely. Cool.
I think the other thing really as well is I don't know how we do this, but it's educating dioceses as well that that it's not a quick thing, that relationship building, you've got to be in it for the long haul. And dare I say that some people in the hierarchy of the church really just want numbers on seats, and they just really struggle with this concept that it takes a long time, longer than the diocese want, actually, I think.
I had a question, but also want to say the start course is great, and I'm a bit biased, but I love it. And my question was to you all, we just talked a bit about what happens if it's not working. What do you do if it's not working? How do you mourn the stuff and think if you've really invested into something and it's gone rubbish? How do you deal with that and building up a team, and then what do you do next?
You just KBO, love. You just KBO, which is a Winston Churchill famous saying, and we all know, well, for those of you that don't know what KBO means, it means keep buggering on. And basically, you know, you are going to put a lot of time and effort in with young people, and they are fickle and they will change their minds. You are going to put a lot of time into staff that then suddenly find work elsewhere. And you know what, if you're looking backwards all the time, you ain't looking forward doing the vision, are you? So as much as it is difficult, and there is that space where you have to rethink things, you've just got to KBO, haven't you? That would be what I would say.
I think you've just described my next tattoo, Tracy. I'm going to keep buggering on my arm.
Well, I'd use the initials, you know.
I am sorry for asking the negative question, because I've done the thing that I hate people doing, going in panel discussions, and you've just built everyone up, and then someone goes, but what about this? And But I wondered if it'd be helpful too.
Well, you have to be realistic, don't you? At the end of the day, we're you know, a church is full of people, and people are fickle, aren't they? People are, you know, we're not Jesus. We make mistakes, and you know, and there's nothing wrong with saying I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. And I think some leaders don't say I'm sorry, and that causes animosity and problems. There's nothing wrong with going and saying, look, you know, we'll have to agree to disagree on that point. There's nothing wrong with saying, you know, how about that hasn't worked. I think actually partly, Ruth, it's because we're so busy and intentional about what we're doing. We don't take time to step back and reflect. And I think sometimes, so what we have at SOT is we have a traffic light system. So we look at everything that we do, every activity, every staff meeting, all the appraisals, everything that we do on a traffic light system. And if it's going into red, we need to, before it goes into red, we know it's heading that direction. We can do something about it. But you can't plan for the something unimaginable could happen. You can't plan for that, but you just have to, you know, we have to deal with it, don't we? And then how we model how we deal with it, it will have a profound effect on our community.
I think the thing is, we're only in it for a blink of an eye. We think we're here for a long, long time, but even as human beings, we're here for a blink of an eye. And we need to think in terms, we're very good at being parochial. We're very good at putting a line on a map and saying, this is our bit, without thinking about the kingdom of God being something which extends across the entire universe. Hey, I've just included Mars in my parish. Brilliant. But when Bailey came to me in the dinner hall at a lantern parade, and he was 14 years old, and he was handing out hot dogs, and he kept coming back to me and handing me hot dogs, and eat another one and eat another one. And what he was wanting was, I've known this guy now for about 6 years, well enough that I can say, I want to come to church on Sunday. And he came to church on Sunday, and I wasn't expecting him to. The number of people who tell me they're going to come to church on Sunday and then don't. And he did. It was remembrance. He came for remembrance. And then the next week he was there, and he brought his auntie with him. And then he joined the PCC at 16. He became an intern last year before going to university, because he didn't want to go to university off the estate. The only person I've ever met on our estate who's gone to university. He didn't want to go to university to pay all those thousands of pounds to sit in his bedroom watching Zoom lectures. So he said, because he'd seen Emily was the previous intern who was exploring ministry. And so he was like, could I be an intern? And so he has been the intern for the year, and we have done leadership, we've done leading worship, we've done youth work, we've done church pantry. And 2 weeks ago, he left and went to university. And he is part of the kingdom of God. He isn't inside my parochial boundary anymore, but that work that we did was still worthwhile. It was still, for a time, we were all a little bit shell-shocked that he's not there doing all of the things that he used to do anymore. But it was brilliant at it, but it was for a time, because he was being built into the person who is now going to go to university, and we'll see what happens. He's talking about becoming an ordained minister, but we'll see what happens. We have to trust God in this, and that even if it was just 6 years of his life whilst that was the period, that's still worthwhile and valid, even if it is just for a time.
And did you want to add something into that?
Only briefly, I suppose I was just thinking, a couple of things really about, when things don't go as you planned. And I think, in many ways, we've all experienced that particularly significantly through COVID, haven't we? And, we found that, well, I certainly found that I actually had to let go of everything and sort of go, oh, okay, so now what? How do we have our relationships in a different way, and all that stuff. So, sometimes when things seem to have gone wrong, that's the moment where God's kingdom breaks in and something new happens. But actually, I suppose that is the moment at which we do have to step back and listen to God, and our view of something going wrong might not necessarily be an accurate one. It might have been for a season or for a time, and we don't things aren't going to ever be the same forever, are they? So I suppose, yeah, I'm rambling now, but I suppose as well, I've found that we live in such a success-driven environment, don't we? At such a success-driven time, and even the church buys into that in many ways. And actually, I don't think the kingdom's remotely about successfulness, is it? It's about fruitfulness and life in all its fullness, and that's not, you can't count that numerically, I don't think.
And something's never a mistake if you can learn from it, surely.
Exactly. Yeah.
If I can just come in there, I think the other thing is, one of the points we're missing really with this discussion is that leaders are vulnerable, actually, and we're very good at signposting our young people and vulnerable young adults on, but how good are we as a church at signposting our leaders on when they need space to recover or recuperate or take time out to rediscover God or the calling on the life? So from that point of view, that's the flip side of what we're saying, I think.
There's something about accompanying our team members and what they're experiencing, as well as accompanying the young people. Yeah. Yes. And we're modeling that. Yeah. And being able to model that, I need to take some time out, or I need to reflect on this, or that's really helpful.
Well, I think otherwise what happens, I mean, you have people that work with you and alongside you that are workaholics, and they think that by working, it takes the problems away, and it just happens. It exacerbates it. It doesn't take it away. Mm-hmm. So why are you not having your day off if it's your day off? And
yeah. So anybody got any further questions? We're going to draw the conversation to a close. I will ask our panel members in a minute if there's one last thing they wanted to share. But are there any other burning thoughts and questions, or just anything that you wanted to ask our panel members?
It was just an observation from Ruthie's question, really. I know that when I worked at Sorted, I'd stumble across a resource and I'd need it to work because I don't know what else to do. So I need to find something that works, and if it doesn't work, there's a bit of distress that goes on because actually I need this to work because I'm now vulnerable. I don't know what to do. I don't know where to. I don't know. I've got to find something else, and we can hang on to resources thinking that they're the gift. And actually it's not, we're the gift. And that's where the listening process comes in, isn't it? And we forget that we're the gift. It's the tract that does the conversion. It's the Alpha course that does the conversions. And actually it's not really, it's us, we're the gift. Yeah.
So I don't work for the church, I work for the NHS, and I'm a psychologist in children's mental health services. And I think there's some really interesting similarities between people who work for the church and people who work in mental health services. And that's what we put enormous pressure on ourselves, that we have to help everybody, we have to get everything right. And if we don't, it's not, we take it really personally, because there's something about the desire to help, whether that's in a church context or a health context, that means we're hugely hugely invested in what happens with what we do. And there's a risk associated with that, is that we don't look after ourselves and we blame ourselves when things don't work. And, it's good to be reflective and to think about what we could be doing differently, of course, because we're not perfect. But I think, giving it back to God is really important, because actually, even if something hasn't worked, you have no idea what the impact might have been in 20 years' time, that young person had some kind of contact with somebody from the church, or a conversation about Jesus, and it will come back in the future, and we may never know that, and that's really hard. In the same way, when the kids leave my hospital, I don't know what happens to them after they go home, and not knowing can be really hard as well.
Mrs. Waters was my RE teacher, and I was a pain in her backside because I'm an adult convert. So I went to university as an atheist. But when I met Ruth in Freshers Week, or the end of Freshers Week, and started going, well, you're a Christian, so you believe in this and that and the other, I actually had a whole host of knowledge that Mrs. Waters had taught me to build on. So I could talk about Genesis, I could talk about Exodus, I could talk about why did Jesus die then, and fortunately, Mrs. Waters' daughter is my age and went to school with me, and we were still friends. And so at a reunion, I had mentioned to her that I was being ordained priest later on that year, and she was like, can my mum come? And Mrs. Waters came to my ordination, and she got to see that all that hard work that she had put in with that kid who was I did a newspaper article that it's a standard RE teacher thing. I was an RE teacher. I went on to become an RE teacher. It's a standard RE teacher thing. Do a front page story about, and it was the resurrection, and I used the headline "Jesus does a bunk," and so she marked my work, "Jesus does a bunk." But the reality is that I had gone in one ear and stayed in there so that I could say, so what was the resurrection all about? And so she finally got to realize that, all that stuff had gone in somewhere and made a difference to some kid's life who ended up being a church worker, apparently.
So it's always worth remembering what comes out of your mouth is not necessarily the same as what's running around your head. That's really helpful. Is there any last thing that you wanted to add, Tracy or Anne? No. Well, I just wanted to
just make cups of tea.
Yeah.
I can't hear her, sorry.
Yeah, Ruth has just asked, how many Bible stories are there that you can use pigeons in besides Pentecost? Noah's Ark.
Oh, got to do that now.
You probably could use pigeons in most of them, couldn't you? Just be creative.
Was he fed by a raven? Raven. Just paint it black. That's brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your time, for zooming in, and Tracy, and thank you for coming over, Rob and Ruth. Rob is staying for dinner, so if you want to pick his brains a bit further about pigeons or scouts or anything else, and it would be really great for you to tell us about Rock Mass as well, a bit more in a bit more detail. Yeah, that'd be great. But thank you very much. Andy, can I ask you to pray for Anne, Tracy, and Rob before we finish? Is that all right?
I don't know where to face, but anyway, never mind. Father God, just thank you for these three guys and the wonderful work that they do. Thank you for calling them, and Ruth too, Lord, as well, who shared some really incredible stuff. And thank you for the blessing, Lord, of having them share this afternoon. And so pray for Rob, for Anne, for Tracy, for Ruth. Just pray you bless them, Lord, throughout the rest of this day, and continue to give them fresh vision in their work, and bless them, Lord, in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you. It's been really great that you could join us. Good to see you on screen, if not in person. But thanks ever so much, Anne and Tracy. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. See you in person at some point, maybe.
See you soon.
See you. Bye.
Enjoy your biscuits and cake, guys.
We will. Thank you.
See ya.
Bye.
See you. Bye.